press the request to speak buttons. I'd advise the Chamber there is, as ever, very little time in hand. And with that, I call Daniel Johnson to speak to and move the motion. Mr Johnson, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the motion in my name. Today's debate doesn't need to be an argument. The Government could choose to be constructive, to look at the issues we face and to talk in serious terms about the powers it does have around skills, around planning, regulation, and about the infrastructure that our economy relies upon. Or they can choose to look the other way, or worse, stick their head in the sand. And I would urge them to do the former, because we need to focus on productivity. And we shouldn't just be worried about the technical recession that we appear to be in now, but more importantly about the 7 quarters of consecutive decline of GDP per capita at a UK level. But worse still, the evidence that would seem to suggest that Scotland is, if anything, underperforming this UK economy rather than being held back by it. Because that would seem to be the indication provided by the CBI and Fraser-Allender Institute report, which showed that Scotland lags the UK on 10 out of the 13 measures that they set out. Firstly, on business investment, briefly.
Fraser.
I'm grateful to Mr Johnson for giving way, and I share much of his analysis in terms of the CBI and Fraser-Allender report into productivity. But can you just clarify, what is Labour's stance now on income tax differentials? Do they believe that income tax in Scotland should be made equivalent to income tax in the rest of the UK, or do they have a different position?
Daniel Johnson.
Well, I'd thank Murdo Fraser for asking me an easy question. But what we have to do is look very carefully. Where there are income tax differentials, we need to look at the costs of that and the impacts that has. That is not the same thing as saying is that we could move immediately to do so, but it is something that you need to pay very close attention to, because I think there is evidence and indication that the differentials are now hurting the ability to attract talent to Scotland. The second point I would point to is that set out in the Fraser-Allender report is the proportion of businesses that are innovation active, as they put it, which is 6% lower in Scotland than the UK average. And in health, where 31% of Scots are, those economically inactive are on long-term sick, compared to just 24% in England. And this isn't an isolated report. The Ernst & Young Regional Economic Growth Report shows that Scotland's projected GVA, as well as our employment growth, is projected to be both slower than every other nation and every other region of the UK. So the Scottish Government, with its significant powers to deliver economic growth, is more concerned with pointing out what it can't do than focusing on what it can. A year on from the so-called reset on business, I think many businesses that I speak to feel that that relationship is stuck rather than reset. We hear new strategies time and time again, goals discussed, but really very little in terms of delivery or implementation. We are now 2 years on from the Scottish Government's 10-year NSET programme, but what has been achieved? Indeed, Audit Scotland have already highlighted the gap in political leadership. That's a quote from the report, with crucial governance structures not even established. Indeed, Ivan McKee, one of the people that was involved with that report, in a recent column set out that the government is chasing good headlines at the expense of economic policy implementation. And I think he's right. We desperately need a plan with laser-like focus on delivery and a government approach that seeks to...
Fergus Hume.
Does Mr Johnson agree with me that it would be deleterious to the economy in Scotland if Labour further increased the windfall tax by 75 to 78%, and also, even more damaging perhaps, remove the reliefs which currently exist? Because in the short term there may be slightly more revenue, but in the long term, in the 30s, there'll be nothing at all. It will just starve future investment.
Daniel Johnson.
I understand that the member's concern, but in the end we have a choice. Do we seek to tax the profits of energy companies or increase tax on hard-working Scots? And I know what I would choose every single time. In our paper recently published on building a business case for Scotland, we set out 3 principles. Having partnership with business, a plan where both business and government understand their respective roles, and thirdly, the convening power of government, where the government must recognise its proactive responsibility of bringing parties together. But I think what we see from this government is a failure to take seriously these powers and priorities that it needs to. So, for example, Berwick Bank, there is a very serious risk that this project, a project which potentially would give Scotland one of the largest offshore wind projects in the world, will be held back. The site still doesn't have Scottish Government consent that it needs, and it needs that by April the 16th in order to take part in the Contracts for Difference auction, AR6, just next month. The decision has been on ministers' desks for 15 months. The uncertainty undermines investment and harms supply. So let's have decisions made in a timely manner where government understands its responsibility and the role it plays in economic development. Similarly, on Grangemouth, we see a lack of proactive steps. The cessation of refining at Scotland's only refinery, a key strategic asset, will cost workers their livelihoods and devastate the local community. The key to this is a hydrocracker. For the sake of £12 million investment, this site could be profitable enough for it to continue. So I ask again, Scotland, what will it take? Will it pull out the stops? Has it held the meeting, assembling agencies such as the Scottish National Investment Bank, Scottish Enterprise, with the owners and other potential investors, using its convening power to see what could be done, pulling all the stops to get that investment? Or will it simply talk about economic factors, talk about just transition, but doing little to deliver it? It's clear that under this government, it feels like we are drifting towards a lost decade of low growth, with high taxes and declining public services. We desperately need a government willing to harness the economic potential of Scotland and its people. A government willing not just to set goals, but to do the hard yards, to deliver the actions to realise those goals. Scotland needs change, and Scottish Labour stand ready to deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson.